I was born and raised in Nederland, Colorado. Lived on some land and kind of raised by hippie-esque parents. Pretty gritty, didn't have a lot growing up, but was very rich and felt very fulfilled in life. Um, Perhaps to fast forward to today, you know, I'm an atmospheric ceramicist, and within the realm of atmospheric ceramics, it's typically non-glazed exteriors and kind of earthy tones, organics, if you will. So if I were to connect the two, I'd say that being raised in the mountains of Colorado, spending most of my time in nature, wood burning stove, heating the house, playing in little forts I built, and playing in the dirt all the time, probably leads to me being interested in the surfaces that I'm interested in and the firing methods that I'm interested in. I would say I'm not a flash guy. I'm not super bright colors typically. And that kind of, if I were to articulate, that kind of is my childhood. Wasn't full of bright colors. It was full of earthy tones and full of organics, and a lot of connection with the woods and rocks and just nature in general. So. Growing up in Nederland, I had a pretty strong exposure to the arts. It was Boulder County is the county that I lived in, and they tend to focus more on arts and science than some of the other counties in Colorado. Perhaps focus on more academics like English and math. So I had a really good elementary art education, and we had kilns, and we had making equipment, and we had a lot of things that I know most elementaries especially don't have that. The arts are kind of unfortunately going out of schools. But probably elementary, touching clay initially, but then even into high school, we had a gas kiln at my high school. I did raku firing and wasn't so much into extracurriculars as I really gravitated towards three-dimensional art in general. I'm also a painter, but I would say that the pottery aspect of it, it's like a tactile, functional, utilitarian thing that I don't know, from like, I also studied business in college. I feel like from a business perspective, there's more daily use and function with ceramics in my mind than with painting. So that's kind of where I've landed with that. But yeah, the light bulb probably went off, well, I don't know, probably when I was, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 years old, probably like 6th grade or 7th grade, when I thought, wow, this is something that I enjoy. However, I did take a big break from clay. And the Missoula community actually brought me back into clay in a sense where, you know, as we all know, Montana is the ceramic center of the universe. One of the ceramic centers of the universe. North Carolina would probably argue at that point. But yeah, here in the States, Montana's got an extremely strong clay presence, and it took me a while to find that community, but once I found it, it's definitely occupied a lot of my time and space. So yeah. I have a beautiful younger sister who attended the University of Montana. I'd already graduated college and was living in Stewart, Alaska. And the winters up in Alaska are pretty rough. So I'd come down for the winter and showed up here in October of 2006 and have lived here ever since. Yeah, I was building houses in Alaska actually, and was taking a total pause from, I mean, to be honest with you, I studied business management in college and didn't have any art classes for the 5 years of undergraduate whatsoever. And was always somebody who tinkered and made, and I've always been interested in construction, and on some level I see ceramics like that too. It's like you've got to do step A to get to step B, to have step C, to then have a final product. It's a lot like building a house in a sense, but yeah, no, honestly, the break from ceramics was from high school all the way until Missoula, which probably, is a decade plus. So yeah. Well, initially I found the Clay Studio Missoula, which hopefully most of us are aware of, right? And Clay Studio Missoula, simply just took a class through the Clay Studio Missoula, befriended some of the artists in residence there, and I guess showed, how do I put it? I was eager to learn, and was invited to fire my first onigama kiln with Perry Haas. And he kind of, I mean, he was very accepting, took me under his wing in a sense. I wasn't in the wood fire class. I had no wood fire pottery experience. I was working with terracotta clay, which is low fire clay at the time, and didn't even know what cone 10 was. I didn't know what any of that meant. Little tutorial for those who don't know, I'm a high fire ceramicist. So all the ceramics that I make are on like one end of the spectrum in terms of temperature. And then the other end of the spectrum in terms of temperature is like electric fired work. Typically, people do wood fire and gas fire, lower fired clay, but typically it's done in electric kilns. But yeah, so Perry Haas invited me to attend an onigama firing. I split a ton of wood, which was super familiar. Um, Spent 6-hour shifts, midnight to 6 a.m. with the wood kiln. That's super intimate. Got to know other folks through that. And then became a member of the Clay Studio Missoula, continued to make work before befriending my best friend in the ceramic community and in life, named Claire Ann Harf. And she is actually one of the original founders of the Clay Studio Missoula. And I took a soda fire class with her where I learned to fire a downdraft gas kiln, which has kind of gotten me where I am in terms of aesthetic. I kind of relate more to being a soda fire ceramicist than a wood fired ceramicist per se. I can do it by myself. I don't have to have a ton of people. The firings take 30 hours versus 7 days. So there's a little bit less time commitment there. The turnaround is faster. I tend to get more sellable work out of a soda kiln than I do out of a wood kiln. But yeah, Claire Ann Harf took me under her wing. She today is like one of my family's best allies and friends. I've built kilns with her since then, and that construction piece to me, I was invited to or asked if I was interested in helping build a kiln at her house, and I said yes, that sounds great. And that's kind of given me a different level of confidence. There's a lot of makers out there that have no concept of kiln building or have no concept even of firing kilns. There's a lot of makers that make beautiful work that's enough for them, and the actual function of the kiln or the construction of the kiln is something they don't choose to consume themselves with, and I've got no qualms with that whatsoever. But for me, I almost enjoy building a kiln and firing a kiln as much or more than I enjoy making pottery. So in a weird way, the kiln is the vessel, and I need a ton of little vessels to fill the big vessel in order to light the fire. So that's kind of how I think of it. Like each cup is and piece in general is important to me, and I try to put attention and detail and love into each piece. But the end goal is lighting the fire. So I've got to have the body of work to fill the larger vessel to light the fire. A lot of atmospheric ceramicists have probably sat around waiting for cone 10 to fall over. When cone 10 goes down, it's like all the work seems to have, it's like
Yeah.
you've made, yeah, you've come out the other end. You're You can down fire at that point if you want to go back the other way, like reduction cool. There's a lot of artists that are experimenting with reduction cooling these days. I've got a little bit of experience with it, very little. Yeah, I'd say cone 10 falling down is because sometimes it doesn't fall down. That's the true reality of it. Also, is that dealing with high fired ceramics. I've built kilns before that didn't ever get to temperature. I've had firings that didn't turn out, so to speak. And that's all part of the learning curve. It's not like the electric kiln where I mean, the worst thing that could happen is the electricity goes out or something perhaps, or the glazes don't work out. For us, you load a whole kiln, you've built the body of work, and then if it doesn't get to peak temperature, literally the surfaces, they're junk. They're like immature, they're just not what you want them to be. So I've unloaded a lot of kilns where you're searching for that one piece or two pieces that are the reason you did the whole thing. But then all the rest of the work either ends up in the dumpster or perhaps ends up being refired if it gets the pleasure of doing so. So my more recent body of work, my more recent style that I've been working with, I'm fond of, I feel more attached to. So there's definitely works I posted some work on Instagram recently that may have been fired 3 times, at least 3 times. So I have a propane kiln in my backyard that I do experimental firing with. It made it in there. I fired it in a gas kiln at the Clay Studio Missoula, and then refired it for the final time in the gas soda kiln at the Clay Studio most recently. This mug is an example of my triple glazed series, which I've been working with a well-renowned and well-known ceramicist by the name of Dick Lehman. And Dick, where did he teach at? He's like professor grade. Maybe he's not even a prof, but he's well known in the ceramic community and is well known for his triple glaze series work. And this is kind of that style for me. So this is an example of something that does have an exterior glaze on it. In fact, 3 different glazes. The red and the green that you see on that cup are from the copper in the copper carbonate that's used in a glaze that I have. But yeah, that's a cup that it didn't meet my liking the first time. I love the form. I love the feel of the cup. Fired it again. Figured I'd go for broke and do it 3 times. The cup's probably worth $1 million. It's not gonna fetch that, but no, I'm finally happy with the finish, I'd say. So really, if I broke it down, really it's a relationship between oxidation and reduction. So I'm an atmospheric ceramicist, but I'm also a reduction artist of sorts, meaning that the kilns that I fire in a reduction atmosphere. And that's a really fine line. If it tips the other way towards oxidation, which just means that there's more air than gas mixing in the kiln, or more, I mean, with wood fire, it's typically always reduction because it's hard to get oxidation with all that combustion going on. But in gas kilns, if you open the damper too much, or if there's too much air going in the forced air blowers on the kiln, then you can get a kind of an oxidation state. So what I would say, the steps that mug in particular went through, the initial firing may have been more oxidized than I wanted it.
Okay.
So the surface was just a little bit, I mean, oxidation's actually beautiful. There's some amazing oxidation artists out there, but the glazes that they use or the clay that they use, it caters to that. For me, I like the darker, earthier tones and not necessarily the brights. So with this cup, it has copper on it, like I mentioned, and copper has an enormous spectrum from that greeny teal that you see on it all the way to like a burgundy red. And I tend to like the burgundy red more than the peely blue green. Not exclusively. I could definitely be swayed the other way, but with that cup in particular, if I'm remembering, it probably was a little bit too blue, and
Okay.
throwing it in a few more kilns brought that red out that's in it. And then also, when you sodify or something, you're actually introducing another agent to where if you have glazes, the soda interacts with the exterior glazes, and you can kind of see the movement on the front of that mug. I would argue that's from temperature, but that's also from the from interaction with the soda atmosphere as well, which is something that I love. So. When I insert, it's like a Mason stain sprayer. It's a concrete people use the same sprayers pretty typically. When I insert it into the kiln, if like the part of the cup or the piece that's facing the opening that I'm spraying into, I could look at a piece and kind of venture to guess where it was in the kiln in terms of the surface. And I would argue that that runny face was probably getting hammered with soda, therefore causing more flux, which then causes more movement down the face of the cup. Exactly. So. Yep. The pieces that are all displayed there are all wheel thrown. Even the chickens in the bottom right corner, those start out on the wheel, and then they get altered afterwards. Yep. Back to the painting influence, I identify as an abstract expressionist. Within that world, I feel like the possibilities are endless, and with ceramics, I take that to ceramics. The possibilities are in fact endless with clay. I've got friends making furniture out of clay. You can make the most non-functional thing you could imagine versus the most functional thing you could imagine. So I mean, we all, we all sit on a piece of ceramics every day. I don't need to say what it is, but there's, porcelain and clay and all the things that we do. Yeah, back to your question. When I throw a piece of pottery, if it's a mug, I usually weigh it out. So I start out with a ball of clay that's weighed out. So at least if I weigh 20 balls of clay out the same weight, they kind of all arrive at the same size. Mm-hmm. So that's some form of control. That's something I didn't used to do, but I've developed in my practice. I actually weigh in grams too. I use a digital scale. And then I've got a form in mind. I've got a height in mind, a base, a foot size in mind. All of those things are considered. But I really try not to make things look like they were made by a robot. I like looseness. I like flow as an abstractionist. I like movement and flow. So I try to bring that into the work. And often I throw a cylinder for a mug or a cup. I throw a cylinder, and then I mess it up, so to speak. I run my finger through the inside or use a rubber rib on the outside and spin the wheel at the same time. And that kind of gives me that flow. And then I study that form, and then maybe I'll push some pieces out or push some pieces in. I've been using this dimple for quite a while here. This is a mug I posted recently on Instagram, and like right here, there's this little dimple, and it's actually a little stamp that I made. And where is it at? It's right here, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but it's actually the face of Buddha. Got a Buddha statue on my shelf up here that's been with me for a long time, and I've got a 5-year-old son. His toys find their way into my studio. I have no rules. There's no right or wrong answer, so to speak. So anyway, that dimple has been something that's been finding its way onto my work, and I like that as a spot to rest your finger. Yeah, everything kind of happens organically in that sense. But yeah, I don't try to be uptight about the work. I try to kind of let the work influence itself, despite me being aware of what I'm making, what the agenda is. I mean, cups are what most potters make. Every potter makes a ton of cups, but I like coffee pours and oil pours and vases and soap dishes and ladle holders, all sorts of different things that are functional in a kitchen setting. So within those, there's some ideal, but then there's also room for exploration all the time. And every single clay is different too. I've got clay recipes that I've developed over the years. Then I also use manufactured clay. So the clay itself, like the specific type of clay or mixture of clay, kind of influences the form as well, because some clays are stiffer and some clays are mushier. I add aggregate to a lot of the clays. Like a lot of the clays, this is a cup I'm drinking out of right now, and there's some dark speckling on it. That's an addition of something called coal slag. Coal slag is like a byproduct of I think of coal mining. It's something people use in sandblasting and jewelry, and I've discovered it and wedge it into the clay, and that gives it a different texture and a different finish. And so yeah, all of those things kind of influence the final form. But I am trying at this phase in the game, I am trying to be present, be aware, and have intention with all things that I do in life. I'm trying to live intentful. So with my ceramics, that is the same. So. COVID days have changed a lot of things for us. My output has changed in the past few months. And selling pottery has been something I've been working on, but the showing of pots has been kind of slow, obviously. We're not getting together in social settings and so on and so forth. The markets and the shows for the summer have been canceled. So I'm trying to shift my time around and use it the best I can. And making pottery all day long, it's not super practical when I don't have a way to get rid of it, to sell it, to get it into the hands of the consumer. So for now, I've got a lot of backstock. So there's not a lot of new pots being made in here, but this is kind of my messy corner here. These are dry ingredients. So these 5-gallon buckets, like we got ball clay up here, kaolin, fire clay, nephsite, titanium dioxide. Those are the ingredients that end up in the glazes or the clays that I make. Here's my bisque kiln right here. This is my wedging table, which I've been sitting at for this interview. Some old pots and various things. My backyard. Chicken coop over there. This is kind of my backstock storage. I have totes of packaged pots in the garage, but this is kind of where I stage them before they end up at a show or in your shop or various other places. This is where they live. So, and then down here, this is some work that's been bisque fired, but it hasn't been final fired. So I don't have a lot of inventory of that. And then this is where it sits before it gets bisque fired. This is my nephew's feet. He was just visiting. He's 19 months. And my 5-year-old son, believe it or not, threw this on the pottery wheel a few weeks ago. And there's little hoof prints on it from an elk toy that he has. So we try to be playful and keep it light. This is a friend of mine's sculpture that I'm firing for him. He's a biologist up in Conrad, Montana. Yeah, so that's kind of rundown of the space. I would say when shows are up and running and I'm at full capacity, it's hit or miss. It's like an on-demand type of thing. If I throw a bunch of bodies for mugs, then it's like I've got to get handles on them. So it's actually nice. That's another thing, back to painting versus ceramics. For me, when I want to work on a large canvas, I need the day or the week to really focus on it. And since becoming a father 5 years ago, and shifting the focus on that. I mean, my energy goes into my family for the most part. That's my primary focus in life. Enjoying nature and being outside is probably second, and art is kind of encompassed in all of that. But um, probably 20 to 30 hours a week typically. And then there's firing kilns also, which is kind of is a side note to that. Preparing for a firing is a lot of work. Glazing pots, all of the work that I do gets wadded as well. So the bottom of atmospheric works will have these little dots here, typically 3, sometimes more. Those are the wadding marks. So I mix up a mixture of basically clay, but then it has various other ingredients. One is alumina hydrate, and alumina hydrate is an ingredient that kind of rejects atmosphere. So wood ash or soda or whatever is in the kiln doesn't stick to the wadding. And if this cup right here was just sitting flat on a shelf during the firing, when I went to pick it off, it would just break right off. Like it would actually be married to the shelf. So that wadding kind of gives you a space between. And it's also nice because atmospheric work is kind of glazed all the way around. Typically work that's fired in an electric kiln sits flat on a shelf, so the bottoms are kind of dry. And that's another thing I like about atmospheric work. But yeah, if I have a firing coming up, I could be glazing, all night long. And then the next day I'm wadding pots, and then, loading the kiln takes hours. And then once the kiln's loaded and the fire's lit, it's kind of relaxed time, but it's also get down to business time, because that's when all the surfaces come together. And, you want to be present during the firing. If you're absent-minded during a firing, I found you can, have mixed results. The kiln doesn't do everything. I've got to do work also and pay attention. So yeah, 20 to 30 hours a week. I mean, it's above a part-time job for me. Not quite a full-time job, but it is like a full-time passion. I am thinking about form and function and firing and kilns and surfaces all the time. So on that note, if I'm lying in bed, I'm often thinking about what I could do or what I did do, or all of those things. So how do I word this? There's definitely people over the years that have said, "Oh, I love your painting. I love your pottery. I would love to see your painting and your pottery kind of go together more." And for me, I mean, maybe the triple glaze series that I've been working on, maybe like, maybe something like this, uh, kind of gets more into the abstract, color field than my typical non-glazed atmospheric ceramics. But for the most part, I see painting as more linear. I see, like the application of lines and layers and color. I use a lot of color in my abstracts. I I tend to be kind of a boring, like a plain dressed person, but I've got a lot of tattoos, and all my tattoos are brightly colored. Like I do love color, but I also love organics. So I almost think that painting is kind of my flamboyant, like flashy, gaudy expression of art, and ceramics is maybe more of my natural. Like, I mean, the colors I get out of atmospheric kilns, I wouldn't want to paint with the same colors necessarily. Like, it might be too drab. Um, I like I like thinking about a two-dimensional painting on a white wall, popping off the wall, catching your eye. My mugs, my functional work, it doesn't have to do the same thing. It's like there's already a value in it just being an item that's useful. Um, from the business perspective, which like haunts me because I studied business management in college and was told that studying art was non-practical, and here I am today. Um, but from the business perspective, nobody needs painting; they want it, and we all need cups and plates and bowls and such. So So that's back to the utilitarian function of ceramics. Like, I artistically am completely fulfilled with ceramics in so many ways. It does seem like a distraction for me from my painting, but I I still feel like I'm able to express myself. I still feel like I'm getting a point across. However, I don't know, I feel like they would, like, my cups would be chunky and would be covered with, because I often paint with palette knives and drywall knives and different, I don't know how to, I don't see the surfaces the same, I guess. You know, maybe it's two-dimensional versus three-dimensional. Um, yeah, I mean, with ceramics, Lindsay, if you glaze, I mean, this was one of the hardest things for me back in the day. So there's a woman named Courtney Murphy who I took my very first ceramics class with at the Clay Studio. I took an open instruction class with Courtney Murphy. She's become a friend of mine, and she's a fellow Missoulian. Um, and I remember finishing a piece, you know, getting a piece bisqued and ready to glaze, and then going over to the glaze buckets, you know, often a 5-gallon bucket, and it says it's, you know, copper red glaze, and I go and I open it, and it's blue. I don't understand, Courtney. Why is this glaze? Why is the liquid in the bucket blue? And she's, well, you know, because that's how glazes are. It needs to be fired, and then it'll be red. And initially, that was really upsetting to me, because with paint, the paint I apply to the brush is going to be the color on the canvas. It's very transparent. With ceramics, there's so much, there's like a lack of transparency, so to speak. It's like, you know, people are like, oh, I want this. Oftentimes people will say, can you make me this? Can you make this color? It's like, yeah, technically I can, but there's so much to it that's, it's like, because of the firing, because of where it is in the kiln, because of, I mean, even that bucket of glaze, like, is it mixed too thick? Is it mixed too thin? Yada, yada, yada. There's all these other things. So for me, trying to, I don't know, it's like a measured result. When I paint, it's very clear what I'm painting. But when I make pottery, I try not to really, I try to predict what the exterior surface will look like, but it's really a prediction. It's not exact science. To connect the current state of affairs with COVID and whatnot, that's kind of something I find difficult. Like, for me, what connects me to that specific piece that I choose to use most regularly is the feel, is the weight, is the, I mean, it's all a touch, right? It's like, uh, you know, my best friend slash not mentor, because she won't let me call her that, but she is a mentor of sorts. Claire Ann Harf. She would say that, you know, you'll see people at a sale, a show, a market. They'll pick up a piece, and when they pick up the piece, you can like see the, when, like, you know, the piece was on your table and you owned it. They picked the piece up. You can almost see the transfer of ownership, like the way they're holding the piece. It kind of is like, this is mine. They're kind of examining the feel of the piece, but at a point you can kind of see them connect with it to where they are like, oh yes, this is the one. And that, you know, back to COVID, that's kind of something that I find difficult. I'm selling online these days. I'm not going to say it's been great, but it hasn't been bad either. I've found that a lot of us are naturally shifting towards that way of purchasing items. But I wouldn't be surprised if people buy stuff from me and then they get it, and sometimes they're like, oh, it doesn't feel the way I thought it would feel necessarily, or something thereabouts. There's something to be said about picking a piece up and being able to connect with it. I mean the, like, you know, you know, the handle. I don't make every cup for me. I make work for the world. So, you know, this cup in particular, this doesn't feel right to me. Like, this handle, I made it. I love the cup. I think it's a great cup, but for some reason it just doesn't have that right feel for me. The weight's nice, the finish is nice, but a lot of it has to do with how I'm going to live with it. And if I pick this cup up right here, well, this one feels nicer to me. They're both aesthetically pleasing to me, and I enjoy both of them very much. But I think a lot of it, I mean, there's people who want a 2-finger handle, people who want like the full Monty, like stick all 4 fingers in handle. I've been gravitating towards the single finger handle, which I really enjoy. Um, but you know, some people, like my wife included, like you know, she's pregnant, so she's not drinking coffee now, but when she drank coffee more regularly, she would like select a cup that didn't have a handle on it, and she didn't mind that heat exchange and being intimate with it. We do drink tea in our house. My wife's an herbalist, um, so we, you know, wildcraft a lot of Montana uh, medicinals and drink tea out of that, or and make tea out of it. Um, but yeah, so for me, selecting a cup is kind of a feel. This is a New Zealand porcelain cup, and then another side note too. There's no glaze on it at all. It's completely naked, and it found its way towards another cup during the firing and got stuck. So then me and the other potter wishboned it. We pulled it apart, and I can't sell this because it has a big chip taken out of the handle. For me, I love this cup. I would have sold it in a heartbeat if that chip wasn't there, but I'm actually happy it's there because now I get to keep it. We grow raspberries, so we harvested a ton of raspberry leaf before the plant started to flower, and we also harvest thimbleberry leaves. Thimbleberry is a local Montana berry, thimbleberries that grow pretty widespread in western Montana. Thimbleberry leaves are like this compared to a raspberry leaf that's like this. So the constituents are the same. They offer the same, like it's like a tightener. Typically, pregnant women will drink raspberry leaf tea as like a, it's like a, I don't understand the full concept of it. My sister did when she was pregnant, but um, so raspberry leaf tea, we harvest a lot of fireweed. Fireweed makes a really nice herbal tea. Um, we also harvest rose hips. I'm trying to think. So yeah, we have a blend. We have a blend that's a good for you blend is what we call it. And in the past we were selling wild crafted tea accompanying my ceramics, which is a very nice thing. I actually make tea strainers. It's kind of a newer thing. It's for loose leaf tea. So it takes the right cup to fit into, unfortunately, so it's a little tight there. But yeah, so you put your loose leaf tea on the inside of that and then pour your hot water over it. And then I also make steeping lids as well, because every good tea drinker knows you've got to steep your tea to get all the volatile oils and things that would otherwise evaporate out of it. Um, so anyway, with that in mind, not a super huge black tea drinker or green tea drinker, but within the realm of my wife's herbalism career, I suppose my whole family, we're all herbalists. We harvest things all the time and try to connect with the natural world and give thanks for what it has to offer us, its bounty. Um, but yeah, just a lot of really mild medicinal teas that are, locally harvested, and definitely love like evening in Missoula is something that finds its way into our cabinet pretty often. My wife works at Meadow Sweet Herbs, and she helps people with different herbal blends of teas all the time and such. She has had a little bit of black tea since she's been pregnant, as just a little boost, a little sip here or there. Um, but yeah, typically we're herbal tea drinkers, and I'm somebody who drinks coffee and probably doesn't need to drink coffee. I've got plenty of, I don't know, adult ADD. Probably caffeine isn't necessarily what I need, but I'm the kind of guy who could wake up in the morning and have a strong chamomile tea, and I go out, yeah, just keep going. It doesn't stop me. And actually, I didn't start drinking coffee until I was 24 years old. I'm 37 now, so my coffee drinking career is pretty short. Prior to that, all through my undergraduate, I actually, in fact, did drink chamomile tea every morning. I was kind of like noted that all of these zombie college kids had to have their cup of coffee with them in class, and I kind of felt left out not having my warm something. So not drinking coffee, my mom drank chamomile tea pretty regularly, and we had it in the house, and I lived with my mom during college. And yeah, I would get up in the morning and I'd brew a little pot of chamomile tea, and I'd take my little to-go coffee cup filled with tea, and nobody knew I wasn't drinking coffee. So I felt like I fit in. And then most people I would tell that to are like, "How are you not sleeping right now?" Oh my gosh. And I think I don't know. I vibrate at a pretty high frequency, so yeah, chamomile doesn't put me down. I could drink a cup of coffee and go to bed. Adversely, I could drink a cup of chamomile and go throughout my day just fine. So yeah. crazy crazy days we're all dealing with here, and you know, love and light and compassion is needed for all. And as much as sometimes it feels a little bit selfish or self-centered of me to be talking about my work and to be focused on this, I think we all need handcrafted goods. We all need, you know, if I can't give you a hug, you know, you pick up one of my cups, that's me giving you a hug. I mean, I put love into everything that I do. And as we all know and hopefully agree, we need art and we need handmade goods in this days more than ever, really. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who I miss, and a lot of people who I just want to squeeze so tight right now, and I'm not able to. And you know, you're drinking out of a Josh Kunstein cup. I can't hug Josh, but I can drink out of his cups. And there's a lot of people that there's a lot of ways to connect with people. Let's put it that way. A lot of ways to connect with people, and the way that I'm connecting with people during COVID is through my ceramic work and through you know, hopefully conveying the love and the light that I experience in my life. I feel extremely grateful, and making ceramics is kind of an extension of all of that for me.